We broadcast this show every morning, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on SpiceFM, Malindi 97.7, Nyeri 90.9, Eldoret 96.7, Nakuru 96.0, 102.5 in Kisumu, 87.9 in Mombasa, and 94.4 in Nairobi. For the next hour as well, we are live on KTN Home and also live on SpiceFM KE, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and www.spicefm.co.ke. Let's begin the hour with today's proverb from CT Muga.
Only when you've crossed a river can you say the crocodile has a lump on his snout.
Only when you've crossed the river.
Across. Only. One side of the river to the other. Only then.
You're already done with crossing the river.
Yes.
That's when you can look back and start talking about the inhabitants of that river.
And you're a safe distance away from the banks of that river. Then you can say all you like.
Right. Right. So let's talk debt, shall we? A story in the Standard yesterday says Treasury eyes 1 trillion shilling loan to climb out of COVID-19 debt hole.
Trillion should do it.
To climb out of a debt hole.
So you borrow $1 trillion so that you can climb out of a debt. So instead of the debt that we already have, we will now have added to that debt. So essentially we are being told, let us climb out of this hole by creating yet another hole. That logic is interesting, wouldn't you say?
So we're borrowing from Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
I think we've added Nathaniel to it as well.
There's somebody else in the running here.
Yes, because that logic is something I don't understand. We already have a debt, eh?
You already had a debt. And before that, you already gave the reasons. And COVID was one of the big reasons as to why this money was being borrowed, because there was some gaps that were left because of the fact that COVID had now made her entrance, and so there was money that was needed to fill some of those gaps. Now, what you're saying essentially that there was an even bigger hole that COVID left, and because of that, we need to then borrow some more to be able to fill that.
We've never
hole.
lacked for reasons as to why we borrow. Eurobond 1 to 1, 2. We've never lacked for reasons.
It's for development.
It's a bit dizzying when you think about it, because I thought about that yesterday. I thought, okay, well, you know what? It could be for development. There could be some projects.
Well, really?
Well, yeah, I mean, there could be some projects that are hanging around that, that need to be
which
completed.
hadn't been planned for before?
I honestly cannot put my finger on even one of them, CT. I really cannot. But if that's the reason that is going to be given, then I think that it would just be the right thing to be able to show Kenyans that this 1, 2, 3 is actually what we're putting this money on. Don't forget that a major chunk of what was borrowed in the month of May was to actually fill a budget deficit for the previous year. Yes. Remember this? Do we remember? This is actually what happened, to fill that budget deficit. Before then, we went into the months of June and July for the new budget, which already going in, there was a deficit.
Yeah, this may be a bit difficult to understand unless you go back to the very beginning when this particular government took power. We had something that this country wasn't accustomed to speaking about or experiencing. It's called a surplus.
I thought you were going to say the truth.
No.
But okay.
The surplus was the truth then, also not very difficult to accept, because we've been bombarded with debt after debt after debt to the point where we believe we've always been in debt. Yes, we have, but we had a surplus. The sum that has been touted from time to time was 4 billion. Not shillings, dollars. Surplus, we had. Remember, that particular government, as we like saying in this particular studio, was also known to have done something we never thought could be done. We had amassed sufficient resources to actually ensure that we could meet our budgetary needs. What we have now is the complete... let me rephrase it. What we have now is the nightmarish proportion of the worst case scenario that you could ever imagine.
So we are now borrowing 1 trillion shillings in one financial year.
Yes, we are.
Right?
In addition to what we already owe.
In the first financial year under the Jubilee administration, we only borrowed about how much? 326 billion shillings.
Only.
In 2013, 2014.
Only.
That's how much we had borrowed.
After we'd extinguished what we found.
Right? So now 7 years down the road, we are borrowing 1 trillion shillings in a financial year,
Yes.
in a 3 trillion shilling budget,
Yes.
with a capacity to raise locally about 1.4 trillion shillings.
Yes.
Right?
How do you like that maths?
Already, we've been told by financial experts that out of the money that we are able to raise in any financial year, about 900 billion goes into repayment of loan.
Yes, it does.
So you're borrowing 1.4.
Oh, that's before we invited this new loan that we're about to acquire.
Yes, of course.
And before that, before the repayments for that start kicking in. Anyway, let's just expand this conversation. Let's bring in the experts and the big guns on this. And the first one to talk to us is Mohamed Wehliye. Mohamed Wehliye is a senior analyst with the South Africa, Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority. Mohamed Wehliye, good morning, and thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good morning, Spice team.
Good morning.
Mohamed, you look like you're in a very nice looking, that's a very beautiful background you have there.
Yes, it's a good place to be. Better than Kilmero, where you are, I think.
It's better than the King Hero Institute, right? And the next person to speak to us is Professor Exen Iraqi, economic analyst and lecturer at the University of Nairobi. Professor, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Very well.
Well, thank you.
I'm not in such a good place myself.
No?
Well,
I'm working very hard in the house.
it clearly looks so, Prof, because you're almost wearing a hoodie.
And you can see on my face, I'm very serious.
We can see on your face, and the hand on the side of your face is actually lending to this belief.
That's a serious posture, Professor.
I am thinking about crocodiles.
Don't insult it until you cross the river.
I saw one yesterday, but I didn't like it.
No?
No, crocodiles have not been known to win beauty pageants, so...
But they win competitions while eating.
Oh,
yes, they do. They're
Yes,
good
they
eaters.
Getting straight into this conversation, Mohamed Wehliye, yesterday, when the news of the 1 trillion shilling plan, the plan to borrow 1 trillion shillings in the next financial year came up, immediately you went onto Twitter and you said, finally, net borrowing is 1 trillion shillings. No one listens. Wait for the implosion and blame game. No one listens to who, Mohamed?
Well, Eric and the team, there have been a few people who have been making a lot of noises over the last 5 or so years. And, to the extent that we've been declared unpatriotic, I think there are a lot of people who have seen what's going on in terms of our debt numbers has not been good. And it can only lead you to, somewhere that is not good. You can't do a budget deficit of over 8% for 4, 5, 6 years and expect to continue to survive. So at some stage, it's going to, you're going to come to a cliff, and it will lead to default, as I said. So these things are very simple. You borrow 8%, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and ultimately it can only lead to a bad place. So this is something that came, I think, on the 9th of September, and it's a normal process that we go through every year. It's called the Budget Review Outlook Paper, BROP. I hope, Eric is not listening to the way I'm saying it. It's PROP or BROP. The thing is that it has to be approved by Cabinet by the 30th of September, and it is the beginning of the budgetary cycle for 2021-22. So basically, what we've seen is that they have adjusted the numbers. It's still not very clear. It's not a normal document. I would say that we can do proper analysis, and we know the reasons why that is the case, because the numbers don't look good. Then you don't get full information out of it as we should. And it's part of the PFM Act requirements that this is done.
So what would we be going into this kind of cycle? You've said we're borrowing over 8% year on year. The outlook, as you say, looks like we're clearly heading towards default. So why would the people at the National Treasury, why would the head of the National Treasury and the head of government approve this kind of move?
Well, Eric, that's a good question, and the answer is not easy. Well, the obvious reason is that we have problems, and we seem to think it's a revenue problem. So, as I told you last time, what happens always is we kind of, budget for revenues that we know from day one that we are not going to get, and then when we don't get them, we revise the numbers downwards, but then we don't touch the expenditure side. So where will the money come from? Debt. And we've done that for the last 5, 6, 7 years. So just look at your own home, do a budget, then you don't get the money you were expecting from your colleagues, let's say in SpiceFM, who are supposed to pay you, they don't pay you. But then you continue to have your expenditure plans as they are, then that shortfall has to come from somewhere. And that's why I told you last time, when the budget, we were doing the analysis of the budget with you, that the deficit that they show every time they do the budget is never going to be achieved. It's going to be way over because the revenues are overstated. They have now revised the revenues downwards. Every revenue item except income tax, which has gone up by 14%, by 14 billion for some reason, which again is not reasonable, has gone down. And we're basically now saying we are going to be short 110 billion in this financial year.
Yeah.
So that 110 billion, I would expect we cut somewhere, some expenditure. But they say, no, let's borrow 50 billion foreign debt and 60 billion domestic debt. So then that adds up to the debt that we already budgeted for of about 850 something. Now it's 950 something. So basically, we just saying nobody can touch expenditure in this country. And we don't understand why. And that is the problem we have.
We must continue living the way we live, but we shall finance this through debt. Professor Iraki, as we talked about the new financial year's budget, we also had this conversation with you. But just looking at this BROP, as Mohamed Wehliye is telling us, what are your views on this in terms of the move by the government to continue borrowing and to raise that borrowing to about 1 trillion shillings?
I would ask a very simple question. What alternative does the government have? For about 5, 6 years, we have been crying wolf, and everybody has been complaining about debt. Now COVID has come, and that is our moment of truth. So I don't think, in my opinion, we can stop borrowing because we need that money. Look at the alternatives. There is the taxes. How do you raise taxes when a lot of people have lost jobs or have lost their businesses? The alternative is to reduce the government expenditure, as my friend Wehliye is saying. But that would probably mean laying off a lot of government workers or government employees. Any politician would never want to do that. I think we need to look at very practical ways of reducing our debt. And I guess one of them is to reduce the waste. I want all government officials like me to be driving a bit so that we can use less fuel. We can use less money to buy cars. Mm-hmm. We also need to tame our appetite for corruption, because a lot of money goes to waste when money is pilfered through public offers. But I think the best way to deal with debt, because inevitably we cannot live without debt the way things are, is probably to start thinking our development model in a different perspective. We cannot develop like China or South America or US and so on. We need to come up with a more concrete development game plan. For example, who said that we must come up with certain projects to be like developed countries? Can we come up with our own projects, unique projects that are suited to our socio-cultural perspective? So while my friend Wehliye says that we are going to get into a hole because of debt, I don't think we are going to get into it. Things are going to balance them out. And one way to balance things out is to talk about debt when we are talking about it. And I'm hoping that we should not be the only people talking about it. There are people who want to be president in 2022. Can they also start telling us how they are going to deal with debt? So that debt is not going to be something to be discussed in SpiceFM, but it should be a national agenda. It should be at the forefront of national discussion and national discourse. Because debt is not just going to be paid by you and me. Even future generations are a stakeholder. That is my informed opinion about the state of debt in this country.
Professor Arakli, I see us hurtling towards, kind of like what Mohamed had said previously, hurtling towards a situation that might be very difficult then when it comes to then defaulting on some of this, because the money coming in is not adequate to fund the country and as well as take care of these debt payments. Looking at it very plainly, what are we looking at? What essentially would happen? Because it seems that in most cases, for the things that you're talking about, that you're describing now, in order for them to happen, that those in the positions of making the decisions are going to have to feel the pinch before something is actually done. Don't you see that coming to light before something is actually done?
That is why I'm bringing in the political leaders, because they are the people who decide on how much is to be borrowed. If you remember a few months ago, or maybe last year, the parliament raised the debt ceiling up to 9 trillion. You and me and Wehliye don't decide how much this country is to borrow. It is the politicians, the people we vote for, who decide how much we are going to borrow. So it is the same people who must give us a debt solution. And they don't seem to be confronting that problem or seeing the seriousness of it. If by bad incident this country starts defaulting on its debt will become more serious because our interest will go up. So somebody must bite the bullet and start saying this is a national problem. We must start confronting it.
But Prof,
that's why I'm not talking about debt, but giving a solution.
Prof, just listening to what you're saying and even what Mohamed Wehliye is saying, it appears like those who are making those decisions do not see a problem with the debt. They're living in this kind of bubble where debt is not a problem, which may explain why Mohamed Wehliye was tweeting yesterday and saying nobody listens.
And interesting, it's not just Kenya where debt is a problem. It is a universal problem. Even the US has reached a 3 trillion debt by now. But the question I've always asked is, what do you use that money for? And I think at the time Kenya started demanding that you have been borrowing this money for this period of time, start showing us a return. If you have been putting that money into projects, if you start seeing the projects, if you start seeing new jobs being created, if you start seeing more people paying income tax, if you start seeing more people paying VAT. So I think at the time we stopped talking just about debt, but see the returns from debt. Because when we're here or when John or everybody else borrows money, you put it into some use. And you cannot keep on borrowing money indefinitely. At one time, you start becoming self-reliant. So I think what voters, you and me, should be demanding is that we have been borrowing money. I think at the time we started putting that money, or we start seeing the results from that money that we have been borrowing. Because I don't believe that money has just been going down as drain. It must have been put into some use.
Mohamed, how do you demand? How do you then make these kind of demands on government? One of the things that we're often told about is that, this money is borrowed for development projects. How then do you demand accountability from government to say that, show your people then what it is that you are working on? If you're saying that this money is being put into development projects, show us the infrastructure, show us the roads, show us the hospitals, show us the schools, show us. How do you then demand beyond saying the words that I'm saying now to make sure that you're seeing value for this money, essentially?
I think that's a good question. But before I answer your question, I would want to respond to what Prof said. And this is unfortunate because every time we discuss debt, the issue of, America is also borrowing. Japan, remember the famous Japan quote comes up. I mean, we have to understand that the U.S. and Japan are wealthy countries. That's the first thing. The second thing is that they borrow in their own currency. Now, we are going to borrow this year about $400 billion in foreign currency, in U.S. dollars. We have a huge foreign debt. And as I said before here, every time we're in a position now where every time the shilling depreciates by 1 shilling against the dollar, we are adding up about 30 billion to our debt. So remember, we were at 101 just a few months ago. We are now 108 to the dollar. 7 times 30, we've added 210 billion in less than 6 months. So you cannot compare that to America, which has the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, and where nothing happens in terms of foreign currency risk. That's one thing I really have to say. What worries us is not even the size of the debt; it's its composition, its mix, its duration. You have to look at the who we owe the money to. It's not concessional debt; it's commercial debt. So we are not looking at only the size of the debt. Now, coming back to your question, I think it's too late. It's unfortunate, but I have to say this. It's too late because it's no longer about where do we cut. We are going to pay 1 trillion shillings in debt repayment. We make about 1.5 trillion. And you can see the circumstances with COVID and everything. That number is not likely to go up. So with only repayment of debt, we pay counties. That's all the money that we collect. What about the rest of everything else we're supposed to do? So it's not even about now where do we cut, politicians. And look, revenues are not likely to go up until after elections. Every time we go into a general election, there's a dip. So don't expect anything to come from somewhere. So now we are in a position where we're in a debt trap. We have to borrow in order to survive. And that line will soon be closed because people who are lending you money will discover that you are in distress. I mean, if you look at the reports posted somewhere on social media yesterday, the guys who look at who is likely to default, and I think we are now number 5 behind Lebanon and Ukraine and Greece and all the countries that have problems. So we are in a big problem, and there has to be a national conversation on how we are going to survive this. It's going to implode, and that's a fact.
We are speaking with Mohamed Wehliye. He is a senior analyst with the Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority, and Professor Eksen Iraqi. He is an economic analyst and a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. What we are discussing this morning is Kenya's debt. Is this an impending implosion? This is Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room, broadcasting on SpiceFM and on KTN Home and also on www.spicefm.co.ke. Well, this 1 week of...
You left when you were like this, you've come back and you're still like this. What's up?
No. There's a change, man. There's something has changed. So this is the conversation that we're having this morning, Kenya's debt. Are we heading to a point where we shall have an implosion? And this is what Mohamed Wehliye's position is, that yes, we are hurtling down to that position. Professor Eksen Iraqi, who is also speaking to us this morning, is saying it's about time that the citizens of this country have a conversation with their government and ask them, look, what are you planning to do?
I want to bring into conversation a quotation that is attributed to a gentleman who was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. I'm told that's not how it's pronounced, but I'm going to call it Luxembourg because that's how it's written. Yes, I'm not going the Luxembourg route, sorry. What he said was, We all know what to do. We just don't know how to get re-elected after we have done it. Would you say that our politics determines how we manage our financial affairs as a country? I'm asking both of you gentlemen.
Who should go first?
Sorry, yes. It does a lot, because let's look at the current situation. We have revenues that have declined as expected due to COVID shock. It's not expected to recover until after general elections. The expenditure is trending up. It's difficult to freeze the expenditure due to politics of succession and the general election. The only thing we can do maybe is to scale down of Big Four. That would be the rational option. But business as usual will be sustained, because CSs and advisors to the president will not dare embarrass him, and tell him that it is not achievable. So there's always that problem. And then so what we have then? The only option now is to borrow in order to please, if I may put it that way, the politicians. And borrowing is kicking the can down the road. But the road is steepening. So domestic borrowing has a limit. External sources are sensitive to debt sustainability, which now, with these new numbers, we are going to breach most of them. So this window of borrowing will also close shut. So suddenly, then we will have a crisis. Now, is this because of politics? To a certain extent, yes. Because no one can, go back to the politicians and say, guys, this is bad. Because those who are supposed to say that are not going to do it. So we had a debt ceiling. With the numbers that came out last week, we are going to have to revise the 9 trillion in the 2022-23 financial year. That's before President Uhuru leaves office. So before the president leaves office, we would have moved the debt ceiling from 7 to 9 trillion, and maybe from 9 to 11 trillion, who knows. So those who contributed this current problem are not expected to be the same guys who are going to give you a solution to it, because they have to survive. They have to make sure what they have done is somehow made workable. And this is all about politics. Yes, politics is a very, very big problem. And that's why we said, the Constitution said, and the Public PFMA Act says that the debt office, for example, has to be independent. It is not. It's still part of Treasury. So, the DMO, which is the Debt Management Office, in any other country would come out and say, these are the numbers. It's bad. It's looking bad. But they can't say that now because, again, they're beholden to politics. So, yes, politics is the biggest problem. And it's the reason why we are in a debt crisis.
Prof, what's your view on this?
I'm holding a very hot potato here. You have to remember that politicians get into parliament in Kenya because they make promises. The ones they make promises, is very hard to hold them accountable. The person who is supposed to stop politicians should be the voter. But look at when you have a budget in counties and you tell people to come for public consultation, they don't turn up. So because they don't turn up, because they don't question their representatives, they have a free hand. So the only way to stop this problem is to make sure that the voters are informed, that the voters can question the people they vote for. As long as they don't do that, politicians will continue doing what they want. Number two, I think at the time we started disengaging politics and economics. In Kenya, they are tied like Siamese twins. Look at a country like Italy. Government after government, maybe 40 governments since World War II, but the country still continues growing. But the reason is the voters are very informed. The voters can question the arrest. The question, the voters can hold them to account. So as long as our voters are docile, as long as they don't ask questions, we are going to remain in this particular hole.
But then when you talk about the voters and the politicians, there's a conk that we are missing here. This is the public service. Because there are experts who are employed into public service, and they're the ones who receive the instructions from the politicians, and they're the ones who are executing this. What is their role in this?
But I can tell you for free that politicians fear voters more than the public service. So the people who can only check the vote, the MPs are not is not the public service, it is the voter. And my friend Wehliye has said how the debt office is under the treasury. So you don't expect those guys to ask a lot of questions.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Professor. I hear what you're saying, because, I mean, when you give the example of Italy and you say that, you know, the voters or the people, for example, very interested and vested in what it is that their government is offering. We had examples from Switzerland, for example, that the government will not touch a project until the people have given their views on it, will not spend a dime until the people have agreed to it. And also realizing that the voter actually is the one with the power. So are we not looking at a situation on this side whereby the politician does not actually want the voter to know all of this information because it gives them a power then to be able to make a decision in the future? Is that what we're looking at here?
But surprisingly, public consultation is the constitution. But the voters don't go for public consultation.
But are we not looking at a chicken and an egg situation in terms of which came first? The people are not going to seek this information because they realize that nothing will be done about it later. So there's a certain kind of apathy that has set in. So nobody will really go because they realize that, all right, even if I come and participate, publicly or otherwise, it's not going to be taken into consideration on a national platform.
So awaken the voters. Let them realize what is at stake in the decisions they make. Let them see that what they consult for makes a difference. That is in the constitution. Because if you let the politicians and leave them the way they are, they'll do what they want. So eventually the starting point is the voter. Let me show you up a bit.
Okay.
There was a time I was taking a walk in one of the streets in Jackson, Mississippi a few years ago. And I found a meeting. And I decided to stop and find out what was happening. It was a public consultation about naming a street. Are you getting what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Naming a street. That is how serious voters are in other countries. After all, the politicians don't use their own money, their pocket money. They use our money. So how can I pay taxes and I don't follow how it is used? So I think the voters need to be educated to realize that once they pay the taxes, that's not the end of the story. They should demand that money should be put into the right use. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that they vote into parliament, women representatives, MCAs, people who can stand for their rights, and people who can do what they're supposed to do after they have been elected. But what happens after we vote these guys in? We stop, we leave them, they do what they want. But if we are always vigilant, they'll do the right thing, including managing the public debt.
But from your own point of view, Prof, what is it that makes the voter behave the way the Kenyan voter is behaving? Why is the Kenyan voter?
One of you has explained very well that they have realized that whatever they do, nobody is going to make no difference. But we just need to have one or two counties, one or two MPs record, one or two MPs record, and then the voters will realize they have some power. And once they realize there's some power, it is going to be contagious. Politicians will start behaving. After all, who else can control them apart from voters? There was a time the president could control the MPs because he decided when the parliament would be dissolved. So politicians were always in fear. Now they have the freedom to do what they want. So the only person remaining to control them is the voter, you and me.
There is.
But also,
yes.
Sorry,
Please go ahead, sir.
If I may.
And some of you are behaving, some of you are responding to my comment as if you don't vote.
CT America.
If I may add,
Go ahead, Wehliye.
If I may add something on public participation. If you look at this document which came out 3 days ago, on the 9th of September, which is the budget review outlook paper, it's actually out for public consultation. So it is supposed to be presented to the cabinet on the 30th, by the 30th of September. But look, you put something in your website and say, there it is, public participation, very technical document. Do you think Wanjiku would even understand that, number one? Number two, for those of us who have been responding to this document and who understand these numbers, even when we raised issues, we've been called names. I mean, there are people who would call you unpatriotic if you say we're going to default or the debt levels are not sustainable. It's like people are saying, hey, you're spoiling the party for us. And this is the problem we have in Kenya. Now, if you are not going to listen to the experts, people who have been making noises, people like David Lee, people like Kwame Owino, people like Professor, even himself, Professor Vaki has basically written. I mean, if you don't listen to the experts who understand the numbers, how are you going to be expected to listen to Wanjiku? And how is she expected to respond to you? So we have this do attitude, even in our public finances. We've seen, things go bad, things go south for a long time now, 3, 4, 5 years. Even the most uninformed person knows that we have a debt problem. But have you seen it in public discourse? No. We're now talking about BBI, and we're talking about fixing the governance of the country. But nobody's talking about the finances because, it's a hot topic. And if you talk about the finances, the whole BBI will come to a stop because people would say, why are we engaging in all this stuff when we cannot afford, the basics? So it is a deliberate way to avoid this topic. But unfortunately, everything else you do or you want to do would be useless if you default and if you have a debt crisis, because the debt crisis then will lead to banking crisis, because most of these domestic debt are held by the banks. They've been piling up, and then to an economic crisis. Then only would the politicians start to talk to Wanjiku, because talking to Wanjiku means the streets, like in Greece, revolutions, and that's what they're waiting for.
Gentlemen, let me ask you a question. The World Bank, according to a report in the Business Daily on the 24th of July this year, recommended that projects amounting to 1 trillion Kenyan shillings that were started in the Kibaki era should be brought to an abrupt halt. They targeted 522 projects which they said were dormant, and that if they brought this to a stop, we might actually see changes in our financial fortunes. Now tell me, does the stopping of projects help?
It depends on what the project are about. If it was about a hospital or a school or a maternity, then that does not help. And I think it is important that once we start projects, we finish them. And that seems to be another big problem in this country, that people start projects and never finish. If I'm an MP, I will start a number of CDF projects. When a new MP comes, he just throws away those projects and starts his own. The same happens with all other government or public projects. So I think while the projects might save the country a lot of money, there was a reason why those projects were started. There must have been an objective. So I think my advice would be finish all the projects before you start new ones. Because a project is always started with an objective. If you don't finish the project, then you don't achieve that objective. So I don't think that would be a good advice to stop projects halfway when you have already incurred the capital cost. Finish them to come up with a new one.
Sometimes better to actually go at a loss instead of...
I think...
Go ahead, please.
Let me add something. I think there is a way you can do it. And again, the problem is because of rent seeking, we are not going to do it. There are certain projects which have been approved. If you look at the debt numbers that we have now and whatever is planned between now and, let's say, in the next 2-3 financial years, it's already known. So we might have had commitments from our development partners for certain projects. And they even allow you to shift some of the approved loans elsewhere. So, for example, now we have about $20 billion of approved facilities, of which we have only used, say, $10 billion. We are left with another $10 billion. Now, we are allowed to say, okay, instead of having the Moranga Nyeri road 4 lanes, we can have 3 lanes or 2 lanes and use that money elsewhere instead of borrowing new money. But that's not happening and will not happen because the bureaucrats and the politicians favor going for new tickets because there's something in it for them. And that's a factor that we have, that's something that we have to always look at. This borrowing, every time you borrow a new ticket, there is something in it for these guys, especially commercial. That's why we have moved. During Kibaki's time, most of our debt was concessional, and it was by design. So you cannot do monkey business with the development partners that give you concessional debt. If you go for bank loans, there are a lot of things that we've seen happen. So even though we have facilities which are ready, which we can reprioritize to other areas, and which we have borrowed and are in our books, we would say, when it was being done, ile kickback yake imekulwa na someone else. Let's look for a new ticket. This is the problem. This is why we keep on piling up new loans all the time. And reprioritizing projects is not a big issue. If you see a project has failed or is not worth it, you have to reach a certain point where you have a stop loss limit, where you say, I cannot go into this anymore because it's worthless. And that's the problem we have, Eric, because every new ticket is an opportunity to it.
But let's also remember that most of these projects are political. They have some political components. Because if I'm going to have a big project in my constituency, I'm attracting votes. And the more I distribute them across constituencies, the more votes I'm going to get. So I have a smaller project there, another smaller project there, and then everybody will be touched by the project. So I'll get more votes. And I think it's important that before we start projects, we always do a feasibility study. So the question of projects not getting finished will never arise. So people don't just wake up and start projects. You're supposed to transfer them. See the benefit. See the benefit, who is going to benefit, and the amount of money you are going to pour into that. So I think this idea of having projects that never get finished should not be part of our vocabulary and our discussion.
What I was asking, Professor, is that sometimes isn't it better to just cut your losses?
It's possible to do that, but that should not be the way to go. I have also had projects that I just stopped and did away with them because I found they will be more costly in the future than now. But these are projects costing a lot of money. It's not a project for me to buy a pair of shoes. It is billions of dollars. So why should we be putting public money into holes? There are people who are employed to plan, do feasibility studies, do the analysis. Why should they give us projects that don't work?
I think the projects just work. It's not that they don't work. The projects, I think, even by the time you're being given money, you are the economist here. People who give you money for things they think will work, because if they don't work, then how will they get back their money?
So then why don't they get finished if we had agreed they're going to work at the beginning? I think we're just trying to defend the people who are not doing what they're supposed to do. Simple and straight.
It's people who are supposed to be doing things that they're supposed to do and they're not doing them. And then and you brought this back to saying the citizens are the ones who ought to be demanding better. What's the role of the civil society? Because we're talking about a citizenry that may not even have access, for example, to this particular document. Now, Mohamed Wehliye is telling us the 9th of September, this document is published on a government website. It's heavy, it's technical. Only a few people would be able to look at it and would be able to understand exactly what it means. How do we engage the citizens using maybe a middle tier like the civil society?
Why is the civil society in Kenya today? I've been hearing about them, but they have not been active as they used to be. They have gone silent. I don't know where they have gone.
There are those who say, Professor, there's a new generation of civil society, and that
maybe SpiceFM is one of the civil society now. So we are being started to into the discussion.
Perhaps.
I guess also people like yourself and Mohamed Wehliye and the others, Kwame and even David Lee and the others who have talked about it. But then how do we roll out this information further and to the lower part of the grassroots, so that, like you said, if it's about people demanding and people understanding and saying this is how much you have budgeted this year, and this, we're just looking at the budget itself and what you intend to do with the money for the next financial year, there are very many things that you must not do in the next financial year. Looking at the budget itself and seeing this kind of heavy deficit and understanding where we've come from, pushing that the legislators also do not approve this budget as it's been presented. Because you see, Parliament just looks at this budget, can see the problem. I'm sure there are very many legislators that you speak to, Prof, and even legislators that Mohamed Wehliye speaks to, and they'll tell you privately that, hey, yeah, this budget has serious problems. But when they go to the floor of the House, they'll pass it. How do we make sure that they do their work?
Well, I think we have a problem, as I said, throughout the budgeting process. I mean, budgeting starts with the formulation stage, then you have basically the adoption stage, you have the control stage, which is the Office of the Auditor General. Now, the guys who are supposed to be checked for these things are Parliament. And unfortunately, again, there is the pork barrel, which they add something onto it instead of cutting, because whenever they complain, they're only complaining because certain parts of their constituencies, there's nothing in it for them. And once they're given, they keep quiet. So I don't expect Parliament, honestly, to be a good check for these things in Kenya, especially because these are people who are self-interested, and you can give them 10,000, shillings in the toilets, and you can pass whatever deficit levels that you want.
Mr. Wehliye, is there evidence to support that particular view, really?
Which one? That they take money from the toilet?
No, the 10,000 shillings in the toilet.
Yes. MPs have confessed.
And it's documented. And
Yes.
it is known in the public
They have
It
said it
happens.
on camera and said,
10,000, was it a minimum or was it the going rate?
Well,
it was a specific transaction.
it's been handed over, it's been taken, it's done.
Okay.
Gentlemen, I think a final question for both of you here. Now, what we're looking at, I mean, it has become so easy to talk about these huge figures. But to be honest, this is not child's play. This is actually what is happening in this country as we speak about it today. Moving forward, what really needs to happen? Obviously, the ministry, the treasury, for example, they know exactly the big mess that the country is in at the moment. But realistically, to be able to get out of this with at least minor burns, what needs to happen right now?
Who should start?
Go ahead, Professor.
I think Professor will give you probably some time, and Eric, in the interest of time, because we have other meetings. Quickly, what I'll say is that we have a problem. We are in deep problem. To get out of it will not be easy. We need to restructure our debt. That's something that we have to do. We need to stop what we have not started. The big four, I have always said, is not feasible. By the time it started, we had already used every space that we had. We also need those who contributed to the mess cannot provide a solution. You don't expect this regime, this administration, to get us out of trouble because they put us in this trouble. That is very, very simple and straightforward. And they will continue to do even worse in the next 2 years left, because it's election time and it's not a time for fiscal consolidation. We've been speaking about fiscal consolidation for the last 6, 7, 8 years. It's never happened. Every budget, we start with a deficit and it goes higher than it was budgeted. So soon we will not be able to borrow because that window will close. The domestic debt, as I said, has a limit. Once we hit the crisis, then it will sort itself out in a very bad way. Very, very bad way.
Thank you, Mohamed. Prof, as you respond to this, as your final comment as well.
I think I want to be a bit more optimistic. I think this country has faced bigger problems in the past, and we have confronted them, and we have gone over them. I think if everybody in this country, from the presidency, the MPs, the judiciary, the ordinary citizens, confronted the problem of debt the way we confront other problems, we can go over it. Because one of the things that we must do immediately is to start is to bring economics at the front, we take economics at the back. Not that way, but we bring economics at the front, then we bring politics at the back. If things were looked that way, I think we are going to start seeing a change. Because nowadays, everything is about politics. Then economics and business comes back. Yet the same politicians, the same political leaders want money. So let's stand the other way, bring the other way around. But any decision we make in this country, from your home, to start from, does it make economic sense? Once we see economic sense, then we can look for political sense. I think that is going to make a change as we approach 2022, because it is 2 years to go and everybody is talking about politics. When are we going to start working? When are we going to focus on economic issues, which are as important as politics, is not more important? So let's bring everybody aboard. And I want from today henceforth, the people contesting for 2022 should start telling us how they are going to solve our public debt problem. That should be the starting point.
Very good. Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Hexen Iraqi is an economics lecturer and analyst and lecturer at the University of Nairobi. We was also speaking to Mohamed Wehliye, senior analyst with the Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. And thank you very much for tuning in to the Situation Room this morning, this hour.